This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. Today is the 10th day of Teves, the 10th day of the 10th month, and it's also 10 o'clock. Okay, but be it as it may, we find in the Slichos that we said today that aside from the tragedy that this is the date that they set siege to Shalayim in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, the 9th day of Teves, even though the Shulchan Aruch says we don't know what happened on that date, but in the Slichos that we said today, it says that today is the Petira of Ezra HaSofer. Today is the Petira of Ezra HaSofer. And it's interesting, we don't find ever that there's a Tainus Tzibur that's established for anybody's demise. When do we ever fast a Tainus Tzibur for somebody's demise? So the truth is, even the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Nevi'im were not Kovei Tainus. It's mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, but nevertheless, there's no Tainus Tzibur. Tzom Gedalia, you'll say. Number one, Tzom Gedalia, we don't fast because Gedalia was assassinated. The Rambam says, on that day, the Gachelas Yisrael, the last coal, was extinguished, and there was no remnant, B'Amanosein Arabim. And V'cheinhu, meaning the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah it's because of the day of Gedaliah's death, but the Rambam says no. The Rambam says the last ray of hope was extinguished on that day with the demise of Gedaliah, and there were no more remnants. So it's not really the death of Gedaliah per se, it's the fact that he was the last ray of hope. But even according to the Gemara that it's for the death of Gedaliah, it's because he was assassinated. But Ezra died naturally. So to have a Tainus Tzibur for someone's natural death, we never find such a thing. Why would Ezra be any more important than Moshe Rabbeinu, than Yehoshua ben Nun, than all the great men who, we certainly commemorate the day of their demise, but nevertheless there's no Tainus Tzibur. However, the Gemara tells us that who was Ezra? Chazal say Ezra was Malachi. The Gemara brings an opinion Ezra was Malachi. And in the beginning of Malachi, the Targum says Malachi was Ezra. Who was Malachi? Malachi was the last Navi. He's the Navi Ha'achroin, and upon his demise, the era of prophecy ceased. What was his last Nevuah? Hine anochi sholech lachem es Elio Hanavi. Why was that his last Nevuah? We explained recently from Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, is because this being the end of the official era of prophecy, Hashem doesn't want anyone to think that, maybe there'll be another prophet who will come and change things. So Hashem is saying, by the way, it's been nice knowing you, Klal Yisrael. We're not talking anymore. We're not going to be speaking with each other anymore. So I want you to know, you're now going to have to wait. Hine anochi sholech lachem es Elio Hanavi. The next time I'm going to be speaking with you is Elijah the prophet. And until then, Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi. You have to keep the Torah. Nothing is going to change. It's interesting. The same way we sort of carry with ourselves the prophecy, Hine anochi sholech lachem es Elio Hanavi, throughout the generations, we also will carry with us the prophecy of Zichru Toras Moshe. Therefore, in the prophecy of Malachi, one of the things that Malachi says is, Ahavti eschem amar Hashem. I love you, says God. Why is it that the Navi Malachi says that? Because since God will not be speaking with us anymore, so his parting message is, until we speak next, you should know, Ahavti eschem amar Hashem. So, therefore, since Malachi is the last Navi, and the concept of Nevuah, Nevuah is like a rendezvous with God, is like God's shining countenance on us, and that ended, and that was a big tragedy. It was a big tragedy that Nevuah ended. So therefore, when we fast on the 9th day of Teves, when we combine it with the 10th day of Teves, really, for Ezra, it's not just specifically the death of this individual, but what his demise represented, and that is the closing of the era of prophecy, and that's another dimension of Asara b'Teves. So this is the idea of Rav Moshe Wolfson in the Sefer Amuna Seitecha and Parshas Vayigash, that it's Ezra being Malachi. This really marks the end of prophecy, and sort of all we could hang on to are those closing words of Malachi, Ahavti eschem amar Hashem. So really 3 tragedies happened. On the 8th, the Torah was translated into Greek. On the 9th, Ezra HaSofer departed, was his demise, and on the 10th was the siege for the walls of Yerushalayim. And Rav Wolfson explains that these three tragedies are one inyan, the inyan of Galus. Because we know there's a concept, Yisrael v'Iraisa v'Kudshabrichu Chadhu. The Torah and Klal Yisrael are one. So the state of the Torah reflects the state of Klal Yisrael. So for example, every Jew has their own letter that they're connected with in the Torah. The fact that the Torah was translated into Greek means now the Torah is accessible to the Gentiles, so it's like the Torah is going into Galus. Because now the Torah is not in its homeland and accessible only by the Jewish people, now it's sort of out in the public. So the translation of the Torah into Greek is the corresponding dimension to Klal Yisrael going into Galus. So you have really what happens to the Klal Yisrael happens to the Torah. So the death of Ezra HaSofer, because what was Ezra HaSofer's contribution? He was the one who created that the Torah would be written in Ksav Ashuras, right? He's the one who, Ezra HaSofer was the one who was masaking to write the Torah in Ksav Ashuras, which is the Lashon HaTorah B'Kedusha. So when Ezra died, so that contribution of Ksav Ashuras, so to speak, came to an end. So really all these three tragedies have a common denominator. Be it the siege of Yerushalayim, which is Golus Yisrael, be it the death of Ezra, which represents Golus HaTorah, and the translation of the Torah into Greek also, which represents Golus HaTorah. So these are some of the thoughts of Rav Moshe Wolfson of the connection between Ezra to Asara B'Teves. Ezra, his contribution, again, he was the last Navi, being Malachi, and he was the one who instituted the Torah be written in Ksav Ashura. So that's one thought for Asara B'Teves.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.